You're standing in the middle of the living room of your new apartment, the last cardboard box just emptied, a scrap of tape still stuck to your fingertip. This is the apartment you'd been looking forward to for months. A higher floor, better light, a spare bedroom you told yourself would become an office. You stand there, looking around, waiting for the feeling you were certain would arrive right now, the feeling of, I've finally made it. The feeling doesn't come. The room is just a room, nicer than the old one, but inside, you're exactly the same person who stood in the middle of your old apartment a year ago, also with one last cardboard box, also waiting for that exact same feeling. You sit down on the floor, back against the bare wall, and for one brief moment, almost like a flash of light that flickers and goes out, you wonder whether that feeling actually exists at all, or whether it's always sitting one step further ahead, forever just out of reach. You get up, brush off your pants, and start unpacking, pushing that question aside, the way you always do. You line books up on the new shelf, hang a few paintings you bought specifically for this place, and once everything's settled, you step back, taking in the whole room one more time. It really is beautiful, exactly as you'd pictured it from the listing photos months ago. But the feeling in your chest is identical to any ordinary evening, no heavier, no lighter, nothing marking this as any different a milestone than yesterday. A year before that moving night, you got your first promotion. The evening you found out, you stopped at a leather goods store and bought a briefcase you'd had your eye on for a while, far more expensive than anything you'd normally spend on yourself, but you told yourself you'd earned it, and a briefcase like that would suit the new role. The next morning, you brought it to the office, set it beside your desk, and waited for the feeling of someone who'd truly grown in their career. That feeling lasted about half a day, then faded, giving way to the familiar sense that there was still a lot of work to do, exactly like before the briefcase. A few months later, a close friend held an engagement party at an upscale restaurant. You stood in the crowd, congratulated her, took photos, and on the way home, stopped by a newly opened premium gym near your place, the kind with private towels and free detox water, and signed up for a year-long membership, even though your old gym was completely fine for everything you needed. You didn't fully understand why you did it that same night, only felt a vague pull, that you too needed something to prove your life was also moving forward, the way your friends just had. Another evening, a coworker showed off his newly leased car, the latest model, a big touchscreen, the leather still smelling fresh. He drove a lap around the parking lot for everyone to see, and everyone was impressed. The following week, you went to a dealership, not to buy, just to look at first, but left with a new lease, replacing a 4-year-old car that still ran perfectly fine. Sitting behind the wheel of the new car for the first time, you waited for that "I've arrived" feeling again. It came, brilliant for about a week, then faded into the ordinary feeling of driving a car, like any other car you'd ever driven. A few weeks later, you were invited to join a book club made up of people in your industry, a small group meeting monthly, rotating between members' homes. When it was your turn to host, you spent an entire weekend buying decorations, a new set of wine glasses, a new rug for the living room, all just to make the place look appropriate for hosting. That evening went smoothly. Everyone complimented the apartment. But once the guests had all left, you sat alone in the middle of the freshly decorated room and realized the satisfaction from earlier had evaporated almost the instant the door closed. At the end of that month, you got an email confirming you'd completed 1 year in your new role, along with an automated congratulatory line from HR. You read it on your lunch break, then opened a new tab and searched for an advanced professional certification course, tuition far from cheap, thinking maybe this was the missing piece, the final thing that would make you feel genuinely secure in your career. You enrolled that same afternoon, without stopping to ask whether you actually had time to complete it. There's a pattern here you'd never noticed until that moving night. Every time you achieved something new, the briefcase, the gym membership, the car, the wine glasses, the certification course, the apartment, you waited for one specific feeling, a feeling of stability, certainty, completion. And every time that feeling only stopped by for a short while, growing shorter with each repetition, before you found yourself searching for the next step again. You try to recall, carefully, whether the length of time that feeling stayed had changed each time. The briefcase, about half a day. The gym membership, maybe a week, though mostly because you were too busy to notice much of it. The car, exactly 1 week, you remember clearly because you counted. The certification course, even shorter. The excitement died the moment the course actually started, and you realized you didn't have nearly enough time to take it as seriously as you'd imagined. If you graphed it, the line would trend downward, not upward, the feeling growing shorter each time even as the price tag of each purchase grew larger. A few weeks after moving into the new apartment, you sat down to review your personal finances, something you rarely do. You realized your income had grown significantly, compared to 3 years ago, nearly 1.5 times what it was before that promotion. But your savings, after subtracting the car payment, the higher new rent, the gym membership fee, had barely moved at all compared to 3 years ago. Income had clearly gone up. The feeling of security had not. You sat quietly for a moment, staring at that number, and remembered something that happened the month before. The company announced a round of restructuring. Nothing that directly affected your role, but enough to make you wonder how long you'd last if you suddenly had to leave your job. The answer, once you actually calculated it, was shorter than you expected, shorter even than it had been 3 years earlier, when your income was far lower. Income had gone up, but your safety margin had gotten thinner, because every time income rose, a new expense, carrying the promise of that "I've arrived" feeling, appeared right alongside it to fill the gap. You pulled up 3 years of transaction history, trying to pin down exactly when each raise had happened, and cross-referencing it against when each new expense had appeared. The gap between the two, almost every single time, was less than a month. The money hadn't even sat in the account long enough for you to think it over before it already had a new destination, chosen in advance by a reflex you'd never once named, until tonight. It has to be acknowledged, sitting in front of that financial report that night, that not every one of these expenses was meaningless, and not the entire problem comes down to personal choice. The higher rent on the new apartment was partly because rents across the whole area had risen, not just for the unit you chose. Car insurance, basic cost of living had also climbed across the board over the past few years, not something you could have controlled through smarter spending alone. But even discounting for all of those factors, the briefcase, the gym membership, the leased car, the wine glasses, all of it still remained, things you yourself had chosen to add, hoping they'd deliver something you now realize they were never capable of delivering. You texted your close friend, the one recently engaged, asking how wedding planning was going. She wrote back at length, describing the pressure of choosing a venue, setting a budget, and at the end of the message added one more line, almost slipping out unintentionally. Sometimes I wonder if people actually see me as having it together, or if I'm just performing it for them, while inside I still feel exactly the way I did at 22. You read that line twice, then set your phone down, and didn't reply right away. What's lost here isn't just savings that haven't kept pace with income. It's the time you've spent waiting for each item to deliver a feeling that, looking back, none of them ever truly delivered, aside from a few short days of excitement before everything settled back to normal. Money, when spent to buy the feeling of arrival, only ever buys a very short-lived version of it, and leaves behind a new fixed expense that lasts far longer than the feeling it once brought. That night, you didn't cancel the gym membership, didn't return the car, didn't withdraw from the course you'd already enrolled in. You just sat in the new apartment, surrounded by emptied boxes, and did one very small thing. You opened the banking app and set up an automatic transfer, not large, just a small portion of your most recent raise, going straight into an investment account before it ever touched your main spending account. You didn't wait for a feeling of arrival from that action. For the first time, you weren't waiting for anything at all. You sat there a while longer, looking at the confirmation screen showing the transfer had been set up successfully, and noticed the feeling this time was completely different from every time before. No excitement at all, no sense of finally done, just a very small quiet, almost dull, and maybe precisely because it was so dull, it carried no promise of fading soon, since it had never promised anything to begin with. Nothing changed right away. The apartment was still the same apartment, the car still sat in the lot outside. But something very small was different. You stopped searching for the next thing to buy. You began asking yourself, every time the urge to buy something surfaced, whether you actually needed that item, or were just hoping it would deliver a feeling that, by now, you knew perfectly well it couldn't. This story isn't really about the briefcase, the gym, or any particular car. It's about how the feeling of having arrived was never inside any object, no matter how many places you looked for it, and about how every time you bought it in a new shape, you never got any closer. You were just paying for another short-term version of a feeling that had never once stayed. The coworker with the new car isn't necessarily more settled than you are. Your close friend, about to get married, with all her careful preparation for the big day, is asking herself that exact same question, even though from the outside, she looks like she has everything figured out. So if the feeling of having arrived was never inside any of the things you bought while searching for it, do you think it's somewhere else you simply haven't reached yet? Or do you think it was never actually a destination at all, and the real question was never where to find it?